Yeah, thank you. What a brilliant video that was. Absolutely superb. And there's something that you said, Louise, about connecting parks professionals across the world. When I look at you guys here, as far as all managing parks and open spaces, I think, and I've argued this for many, many years, to politicians, to leaders of councils, to you name it, that actually I think what we do is one of the most important things in local government. We touch the lives of absolutely everybody. And when we think about what parks and open spaces bring to people, they bring everything. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your background is, what your religion is, what your culture is. It does not matter. Parks and open spaces are absolutely here for everybody. So I think the whole thing about connecting parks professionals from around the world is superb. So I actually applaud what World Urban Parks do. People's Parks, a new revolution for people, place and planet, which I thought was quite a challenging thing, creating a revolution for public parks across the world. And I always start off with something really, really positive. Many of you may well know Birkenhead Park was one of the first municipal parks that we had in the United Kingdom, opened in 1847 and is hopefully about to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And Birkenhead Park is incredibly, incredibly important in the movement and design of public parks across the country, because partly it was also the inspiration for Central Park in New York City. So an English landscape in the middle of New York. So I always started with something very, very positive. And I'm going to go back in history. I'm going to get rid of my notes. I don't need them now. Go back in history about what history tells us. And I'm a parks historian. I've written about parks across the world, but particularly in the UK, about how important history is and what history tells us. You know, we don't learn from history. We don't learn from the mistakes that we made. But you go back to the very, very first reason why we had public parks, and particularly in the UK, we go back to 1833, over 170 odd years ago, where the Select Committee for Public Walks, one of the first governments in the world to identify how parks and green spaces could be calculated to promote the health and comfort of inhabitants, very much what we do to this day. That's 190 years ago. Incredible long time. And it was many years before the Great Parks Movement actually took off. But once the Parks Movement took off, I don't think there was actually anything that actually stopped us. And the UK became a nation known as park builders. And when you look at why we had parks way back in the early days, and this is a quote from 1895 that describes the East End of London, and it's a pretty grim description of the East End. An evil plexus of slums that hide human creeping things, where filthy men and women live on pennorths of gin, where every citizen wears a black eye and no one ever combs their hair. Am I getting a different one? Is that better? Excellent. Thank you. No one ever combs their hair. It gives an impression of how bad conditions were in the East End of London at that time. So what did the initial first revolution in parks building actually achieve? Well, in the UK, 27,000 public parks. That's how many public parks we now look after and manage in the UK. Right across the country, in some of the finest parks that you'll see, certainly in the UK and across the globe. Birkenhead Park, Derby Arboretum, Crystal Palace Park, and Victoria Park. The other thing that we ended up as a result of the first revolution in park design was that the Royal Parks of London were eventually opened up, previously denied to people who were living in London. You weren't allowed in them. We ended up with garden cities and new towns. We ended up with new legislation through Town and Country Planning Acts. And most of all, what you people do here, we ended up with people managing parks, the profession of parks management and parks departments. It was a new profession. But did the whole idea of parks actually improve what we had? The health of the nation? Well, yes, it did. It had a significant impact, along with many, many other things that were brought about at that time. Crystal Palace Park still exists. One of the very, very first public parks that we that we had, the Crystal Palace, obviously long since gone, and the dinosaurs that we have there still exist, but certainly one of the most important public parks that came about as part of the first parks revolution. And also Birkenhead Park. If anybody's not been to the UK and been to Birkenhead Park, it's certainly well worth a visit. One of the finest public park designs in the UK at that time. That was the first parks revolution, and like in many areas, like in many communities, like in many nations, time does not stand still, and we went through a period of significant decline in the UK. And this really kind of started around the 1960s, 1970s, where we had changes in leisure and recreation. Parks became less important in the UK. The impact of 2 world wars, financial crises, economic downturns, the rise of leisure centres, the whole idea that parks managers didn't really need to be there anymore. Other people could manage parks. And the kind of disappearance of features within parks, things like bandstands and fountains, and the bedding gradually disappears. As long as the grass gets cut, does anybody really notice that difference? Staff disappearing, and also the privatisation and commercialisation of public parks. Something I call degradation, desertion, and decline. Sounds very, very depressing. And when you look at some of the images that we had in the kind of 1960s and 1970s about how bad some of our parks actually became, deserted lidos, lodges kind of boarded up, gates padlocked, litter bins actually with no bins inside them, pretty grim times. So the whole idea of that initial revolution had just literally gone. But then things started to change again. 1990s, this whole idea of revival of the parks that we had. Was that a parrot? Well, I've ever been disturbed by a parrot before. The whole idea of a revival in the 1990s, lottery funding rescuing many parks, restoration revival, communities revived, the whole idea that actually parks were very, very good for local communities. Central government and local government actually realizing again that parks were good for us. They'd forgotten what history had told us. And the whole idea of investment from the lottery and from central government, over £1 billion invested back into UK parks across the nation, particularly in children's play. But we never had it so good. It was superb, but it wasn't to last, sadly, again. Come on, here we are. But the revival actually brought us some significant improvements. So when you look at the kind of second revival or second revolution in parks, bandstands being used again, in particularly palm houses, glass houses restored and being used again. And communities, taking ownership of parks yet again. And this bottom one on the right-hand side here is to me, is particularly poignant. These ladies are on a bandstand in Hull, which is in the East Riding of England, very industrial, and they're Afghan refugees, again evacuated from Afghanistan as part of the efforts there, and are sat here having a picnic on a bandstand in Hull in the east of England. It's just very, very poignant. So the recognition of what parks could bring us. And then what hit us? The financial crisis and COVID-19. We went bust again, and I'm sure this is happening globally, the issues that we're having to face once again. And COVID affected us all in more ways than one, but obviously as we were gradually released from lockdown, parks were almost like the sanctuary for everybody again. But the pressures that brought in relation to use of those parks and the resources that we had to manage those parks were really, really stretched, as you can see here. So the crisis that we have, the current crisis, of which we certainly do have, not just in the UK but elsewhere, is that funding has been lost. COVID has affected us. It's affected governments. The UK has lost something like 690 million out of the park sector. That's an incredible amount of money just lost to the sector. Staff have disappeared. Skills have been lost. The real issue around those working in parks and open spaces. We've got real concerns about biodiversity and loss of biodiversity, and it's interesting seeing some of the case studies that World Urban Parks are showing around biodiversity and how we should be enhancing biodiversity. The issue of climate change is significant. We all know it, we all accept it, it's a fact. And again, once again, health and well-being, particularly post-COVID, and the impact that has had on the nation, again, whether it's physical health or mental health. And I always think that what's one of the biggest things that's really impacted our lives as we speak? Uber Eats, Just Eat, Deliveroo. We all sit at home now ordering a McDonald's or a Burger King or whatever it is, and we're all sat at home getting older and fatter. It's not great. And again, what do we learn from history? We go back to history. We go back to when we first had parks. What did we learn from that? Well, we need to learn from history. We need to learn that actually what history tells us, parks were actually good for us. And we need to keep reminding people that parks are actually good for us. History tells us this. Academics keep telling us this. We know this. But why is it we can't get politicians to understand that parks are actually good for us? We got some coverage in the UK, which kind of was useful at that time. So why is it that politicians do not listen? I don't know. If somebody can answer that one, then we're halfway there. That wasn't the parrot. So what do we need? We need a new revolution, embracing people, place, and planet. This is what parks can bring us. We need to learn from history what it is we actually achieved at that time and why we ended up with public parks. And as professionals, connecting professionals across the globe, right? We need to become multi-skilled, multifaceted, multi-talented, and most of all, a new generation of influencers. Now, my daughter always goes on about TikTok, and influencers, people who are influencing certain things on social media. Perhaps that's what we need in parks, the influencers who can actually regenerate the interest that we should have in public parks. So our roles as park managers, it's not just about horticulture anymore. Our roles need to change significantly. I generated this a wee while ago about trying to understand what a park manager does traditionally. This is in the days when I first started out as a traditional parks manager. It was around managing staff, visitors, contract management, managing your budget. Horticulture was always there or thereabouts. Managing assets, a very, very traditional park manager. But when you want to try to unravel what it is we need to do today to be multifaceted, multi-skilled, it's huge. These are the kind of things that we're now having to embrace and tackle. Things like flood alleviation, public health, natural capital, biodiversity, funding, new facilities, awards, all these different things that we're now having to embrace as park managers. So the old park manager of kind of growing up, being a horticulturalist is long, long since gone. We need to be multifaceted, multi-talented. And trying to find these people that fit all this is the challenge that we face today. So trying to work out what it is we need to do, I came up with kind of 10 bullet points. You may agree, you may not agree, but number one is identity. Identity is really, really important. We're parks people, we're parks professionals. At least have the title in your job title. I'm a park manager. That is what I do. So when people say to me, what do you do for a living? I'm a parks manager. What do you do? I manage parks. And in the UK, we have lots of local government reorganisation. We have lots of people now call themselves place managers. They manage place. And I often think to myself, well, what is it you do? Well, I'm a place manager. What does that mean? Well, I manage place. Well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean anything. You manage parks, have parks in your job title. It's really, really important. Identity. Career. Connecting professionals across the globe. So important. We need a career pathway. So again, the old traditional route of being a parks manager was through horticulture or through landscape, etc. It's very, very different today. The old traditional route has long, long since gone. Certainly UK. we need to be targeting other areas and trying to encourage people to come into the industry or into the career, whether it's a landscape architect, which is what I used to be, an ecologist or a scientist, but creating parks managers of the future. Because at the end of the day, it's a brilliant, brilliant career. It's superb. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Number 3, we need our icons. Who are the stars in the industry? You know, whether that's locally, nationally, or internationally. Who are the icons? Every industry has shining lights. My daughter tells me on TikTok who they all are, who are the influencers. So we need to identify who these stars are, and they become our influencers. Really, really important. Number 4, a voice. You know, we need a voice. And you know, I'm still up here giving it this. But actually, we need a politician who gets it, whether it's locally or whether it's nationally or even internationally, who actually gets it, who understands what the role of parks bring to communities today. Really, really important. Number 5, Luis, representation. Again, whether it's nationally or internationally, be part of a body that represents what you do, because they are your voice. They will be the ones that can help influence politicians and make a difference. The ability to network, lead, inspire, and influence others is incredibly important. And also visibility. Number 6, be visible. You know, don't be invisible. Don't just imagine going to work just doing what you do, but actually you need to be visible. So celebrate your achievements, celebrate your successes. And there are many. I mean, I've worked in parks 35 years. Every time we open up a new children's play area, we invite the local politician, we invite the paper, we invite the radio. We celebrate it. We are visible. And one of the best ways in which we can do that is through the Green Flag Award, which is the national quality mark, which is now international across the world, about the quality of parks that we have. Number 7, strategy. Now again, this is something that we're becoming more and more strong on, is don't just look locally. Look at the bigger picture. You know, what is it we can do as far as the bigger picture, as far as our parks and green spaces? Have the biggest impact, the maximum impact on your overall bigger place is becoming much, much more important. Health, number 8. Who is responsible for managing health within your team, within your local authority, within government? You know, again, history tells us parks are very, very good for us, for our fitness, our physical health, and our mental health. So who is responsible for health? They could be your success. They could be the key to your survival and your ultimate success. And number 9, climate. We have a climate crisis, fact. What can parks bring to mitigate the climate crisis? You know, if we can solve that, if we can sell that, that is going to bring us further funding, and that is going to, again, improve the quality of the parks that we've got, but helping part of the emerging climate crisis. And most of all, this is something I've always want to be in my mantras, is take risks. Don't be afraid to take risks. Be bold. Take the initiative. Influence. Network. Be informed, and don't be afraid to get it wrong. I've got it wrong so many times. But it's worth taking those risks. So, and again, I think, as I've come to the end, is what is it about quality, quantity, accessibility? I mentioned that we've got 27,000 parks in the UK. That's an awful lot of parks to maintain and look after. And often politicians say, oh, we don't have enough green space. We need more green spaces. We need pocket parks. We need doorstep greens, we need millennium greens, we need more parks, we need more open spaces. But we cannot maintain what we've already got. So why are we creating more? So the answer, in my view, is actually quality matters. Look after what you've got first, better. And then if there's any issues as far as quantity, that's then when we should be looking at resolving some of those issues. But look after what we've got. Quality matters. And green flag. Again, I will always push green flag. We have green flag in your area, in Turkey. Case studies, a couple of case studies. This is one I used to work in Watford, just north of London. And this is Canterbury Park, one of the biggest parks, certainly in the region, very, very big park. And in 2011, the parks in Watford were in decline. They were very, very poor. We only had 3 green flags. We had no income generated, hardly any events, no strategy. no bigger picture. We had no leadership as far as politically and officers again. There was no real drive to improve parks in Watford, and certainly no investment in parks or play. And volunteers were absolutely minimal, very, very little indeed. So what did we do? 2021, we invested £25 million in parks in Watford. The elected mayor was crucial to this. He absolutely got it. He was a political leader that got it. We had a strategy, a bigger picture. We looked at the town as a whole. We had a 10-year strategy as far as how we were going to improve parks in the borough. As a result of that, we got lottery money. By the time I left, 17 green flag parks, so 17 parks that were hitting that really high quality standard. Very, very important. Cafes, events, play areas improved, more and more volunteers doing things in parks. Partnerships established. You can't do it all on your own. Establish key partners with other organisations. And we had multi-award winning projects, and 3 parks voted in the top 10 People's Choice annually. That's a remarkable achievement in a very short space of time. And it was all led by the elected mayor at that time. So cases like this, again, green flag, new cafes, new skate parks. Skate parks are absolutely superb, working with young people on those in particular. Another case study, quite a lot of text on here, I won't go through it all, but in Lancaster in the northwest of England, they are looking at how they can combat the issues around climate change and looking at how they maintain their green estate. And looking at things as far as grass cutting regimes, mowing regimes, grass verges, parks, natural green space, working in partnership with organisations like Natural England or the Butterfly Conservation Trust, looking at what they can do to increase the number of pollinators in Lancaster. And it was a remarkable piece of work. And the way in which they did it was they came up with these whole different standards of how they would maintain their green estate right across the city. And they worked in consultation with the community, with politicians, with volunteers, and looked at different ways of maintaining their assets, amenity prestige to wildflower mix to verges, all different ways and different standards. Again, looking at the bigger picture rather than just locally. Norwich, where I currently work, we're just starting out on a road of how we can regenerate our parks in the city of Norwich. Beautiful city, lots of very old historic parks, but again, we're taking a bigger picture, a strategic citywide approach about how to regenerate and restore our parks in the city of Norwich. And again, we're doing it through a regeneration strategy. We're working in partnership. We've got over 60 organisations interested in working with us in regenerating our parks in the city of Norwich. Again, it's very much a citywide approach, and we're putting heritage, biodiversity and people at the heart of what it is that we're doing. Really, really important. Quality. It's quality that matters. That's what we should be aiming for. And it's green flag. I think it's the last case study. This is another case study that we had in Watford. And this is very much around conservation, but getting people fitter and healthier. It's something called the Green Gym that was organised by an organisation called the Trust for Conservation Volunteers. And again, this is people who have mental health issues, physical issues, but particularly around mental health, getting them out in the park, volunteering, doing conservation work, but also keeping fit. So it's fun, but also it has an economic value. So the work in which they're doing cost about £1, but actually brings us back a £4 of investment. So it's significantly important, even as far as the economy as well. So it's a really, really good project that's worked. And I think that is it. That is my time. I love that picture. Okay.